In this video, we are going to learn The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. Before going into the story, let us learn something about the author. Kate Chopin, born Catherine O'Flaherty in St. Louis, Missouri on February 8, 1850 and died on August 22, 1904 in St. Louis, is considered one of the first feminist authors of the 20th century. Born to a prominent St. Louis family, Catherine O'Flaherty read widely as a girl. Married in 1870, Catherine followed the conventional path of a housewife until the untimely death, that is, the premature death of her husband, altered the course of her life. She began to write about the Creole and Cajun people she had observed in the South. Creole refers to the people of Louisiana. Her early novel, At Fault, was not much noticed by the public, but The Awakening, published in 1899, was widely condemned. Condemned means denounced or blamed. However, by the 1950s, scholars and others recognized that the novel is an insightful and moving work of fiction. Chopin was later also acclaimed, that is, greatly praised, for her finely crafted short stories, of which she wrote more than 100. Talented and prolific, prolific means creative or productive, she was influenced by the French short story writer Guy de Maupassant. Chopin placed most of her stories in north-central Louisiana, many in Natchitoches, and she published two significant short story collections, Biofolk in 1894 and then A Night in Arcady in 1897. The last paragraph is the most important paragraph. Some argue that modern feminism is the advocacy of women's rights on the ground of the equality of the sexes. Okay? So some argue that modern feminism was born on her pages, and one needs to look no further than her 1894 short story, The Story of an Hour, to support the claim. This story was first published in 1894 as The Dream of an Hour before being republished under the current title in 1895. The reader should note the relationship of the leading figure in that story to the circumstances of Kate Chopin's own life. So when you write a 15-mark question, you have to include an introductory paragraph. You all know that, right? So for that paragraph, you have to get details from the author introduction given in your book. So try to underline the important things. Say, for example, in the first paragraph, it is mentioned that Kate Chopin is considered as one of the first feminist authors of the 20th century. So you can mention that, you can mention some of her notable works, and you can take points from the last paragraph, as the last paragraph is about the story of an hour. To help you understand the story in a better way, I would like to give you some more information about her personal life, which is not given in your book. Kate Chopin married Oscar Chopin in 1870, and she had 6 children between 1871 and 1879. But in 1882, Oscar Chopin died, leaving a debt of $42,000. So Kate Chopin had to struggle a lot, and she took care of her husband's business, and after 2 years she had to sell it. Lot of struggles she had in her life. And during the 1890s, she started establishing herself as a writer. At first, people did not accept her work, but slowly she got recognition. So, when you learn the story, please keep all these things in mind. We have only four major characters in the story, and we have one more character who is a doctor whose name is not mentioned in the story. So you can see the names of the main characters being displayed. The most important character of this story is Mrs. Mallard. She is the wife of Brently Mallard, and her original name is Louis. Josephine is the sister to Louis, who is called as Mrs. Mallard in the first part of this story. And Richards is the friend of Brently Mallard. So we have four main characters in this story. They are Mrs. Mallard, Josephine, Brently Mallard, and Richards. Now to the story. Knowing that Mrs. Mallard was afflicted with a heart trouble, great care was taken to break to her as gently as possible the news of her husband's death. So, from the first paragraph, we come to know that Mrs. Mallard was suffering with a heart trouble, and so these people, that is, Josephine and Richards, were taking great care to break to her as gently as possible the news of her husband's death. Who is her husband? Mr. Brently Mallard is her husband. So he has passed away, and these people want to convey her the news as gently as possible because she may contract a heart attack and die all of a sudden hearing this shocking news. So, in order to avoid that, they are taking great pain. It was her sister Josephine who told her in broken sentences, veiled hints that revealed in half concealing. So they are not just telling the fact. Her sister Josephine is finding it very difficult to convey the news to her. She is telling the news or she is telling the fact in broken sentences, veiled hints, that is, hidden hints, that revealed in half, concealing. Concealing means hiding. Her husband's friend Richards was there too, near her. So, in the first scene, we can imagine this as a scene where we find three people, two people finding it really difficult to convey the news of Mrs. Mallard's husband's death. It was he, that is Richards, who had been in the newspaper office when intelligence here refers to the information of the railroad disaster, that is accident, was received, with Brently Mallard's name leading the list of killed. So Richards was in the newspaper office when he received the news of the railroad accident, and Brently Mallard's name topped the list of killed. He had only taken the time, that is, Richard had taken only some time to assure himself of its truth by a second telegram, and had hastened means moved quickly, to forestall any less careful, less tender friend in bearing the sad message. So Richards waits for the second telegram because he wants to confirm the news, and then he rushes to the house of Mrs. Mallard, that is Lewis, to stop any less careful friend telling the news about the death of her husband. Is it clear, students? Okay. She did not hear the story as many women, so now they have conveyed the truth about her husband's death to her. Let's see her reaction. She did not hear the story as many women have heard the same, with a paralyzed inability to accept its significance. So, usually, when people hear about such a sad news, they become paralyzed, stunned. They won't be able to say anything, they won't be able to do anything, they'll be just stunned. But her reaction is different. She weeps at once. See the text? She wept at once with sudden wild abandonment in her sister's arms. So she weeps and falls on her sister's arms. When the storm of grief had spent itself, she went away to her room alone. So she cries for some times and then she goes to her room alone. So all these things are happening in the downstairs. Now Mrs. Mallard is moving to upstairs to her room. So in this story, downstairs symbolizes her imprisonment, and upstairs symbolizes her freedom. There, in the upstairs, in her room, she stood facing the open window. A comfortable, roomy armchair. See, roomy means comfortable. Into this, she sank, pressed down by a physical exhaustion, that is tiredness, that haunted, that disturbed her body and seemed to reach into her soul. She feels extremely tired. The tiredness even disturbed her body and soul. It reached into her soul. She is completely disturbed. Now look at her reaction. She could see in the open square before her house the tops of trees that were all aquiver. Aquiver means marked by trembling or quivering with a new spring life. She has just now heard about her husband's death, but now she is able to look at the trees filled with spring life. Is it not contrary? The delicious breath of rain was in the air. It seems to be drizzling outside, and she is able to smell the delicious breath of rain in the air. In the street below, a peddler was crying his wares. So she is even able to listen to a hawker shouting to sell his wares, that is, goods. The notes of a distant song which someone was singing reach her faintly. Faintly means lightly. So somebody is singing from a far away place. Somebody is singing a distant song, and she is even able to listen to that. And countless sparrows were twittering in the eaves. The eaves is the underside of a roof that extends beyond the external wall of a building. There were patches of blue sky showing here and there through the clouds that had met and piled one above the other in the west facing her window. So here, the window on the first floor symbolizes the means to see the visions of the outside world as per her choice. Let me repeat it once again, it is very important. Window on the first floor symbolizes the means to see the visions of the outside world as per her choice. So, what does it mean? After hearing about her husband's death, she moves to the first floor and she enters into her room. She sits in an armchair comfortably and she sees through the window as if she is seeing all the things for the first time. As I told you before, the upstairs symbolizes her freedom, but downstairs symbolizes her imprisonment. So, after hearing about her husband's death, she feels as though she has attained freedom. So, she is able to enjoy the outside world. She feels as though the trees are filled with spring life. She is able to listen to the songs, listen to even the minute sounds. She is able to enjoy the atmosphere. Okay? She sat with her head thrown back upon the cushion of the chair, quite motionless, except when a sob means cry, came up into her throat and shook her, as a child who has cried itself to sleep continues to sob in its dream. So occasionally she cries, but at the same time, she is enjoying the outside or the things present outside the window. You just think about the situation. Usually, when people hear about such a disastrous news, they won't have the ability to think about the other things. They'll weep and weep and weep. But here, Mrs. Mallard is doing things which do not happen in normal life with a normal person. Yes, so she feels free. What makes her feel so is given in the rest of the story, which we'll be learning in the next class. So I request all the students to go through the story. Okay, so we shall learn the next part of the story in the next class. Thank you, students.